Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. We've gone outside today, so if you can hear birds and cars and a dog in the background, it's because we're sitting in my garden.
See, we thought it was, and the reason we're outside is because we're imminently about to have a barbecue, which is, of course, the reason why it's raining.
Yeah, it is.
We've got a fantastic guest for you this week. We have Louise Gray, who wrote this book here, if you're watching this on YouTube, The Ethical Carnivor. We told you 2 weeks ago to go and get a copy so that this podcast would be even better for you, and I hope you did. It's a really interesting read, and I think you'll find her views and where she's come from to take part in countryside pursuits, hunting and fishing, really quite fascinating.
I found it interesting. I learned a lot about meat production in this country from speaking to her.
And sort of the research we did prior to doing the interview.
It actually made me think a bit about meat choices.
Yeah, it did. So that's who we have on. But of course, we have a competition winner from our competition 2 weeks ago, which was to win a pair of Smith Optics shooting glasses, which I have here. And we have a winner, which we didn't actually select this week.
No, we didn't. My good friend of mine, who's a Navy diver, who in fact I think was the third guest on this show. You can go way back in the archives now. He's standing behind the camera and he picked the winner. So Chris picked it, not us. And the winner is?
John Seeley.
So well done, John.
He had a really cool picture taken from inside a surfboard, inside a wave. Yeah. Which was very cool. So this is what you win. A set of Smith Optics shooting glasses, and it was the ones with the interchangeable lens. Shoot us a mail, John, and we will get this out to you.
Yep.
We've got another competition. And it is to win two things, both from Hornady. We have a Hornady beer mug, or you don't have to put alcoholic beverages in it.
No, you don't.
You can put non-alcoholic beverages.
And you don't get the spaniel that's trying to lick it either.
A Hornady beer mug and Hornady ballistic range bands. You can wear these on your wrist, but I've also seen them just put around the butt of your rifle. And the idea behind the band is that once you have your cartridge calibrated to your specific rifle, you can write in either your drop in inches here or how many clicks you need to adjust your scope. So a nice convenient way to get your ballistics on your rifle, but not have them there fixed permanently, because you can take the band off and stick it back on top of your gun cabinet. So those are the two things you can win this week.
Yep.
And we're not going to run a picture competition this week. And the main reason for that is we had somebody ask, are you always going to run picture competitions? Now, they're incredibly popular, which is why we've been using picture competitions. Yep. But we're going to try something different.
And you don't know what it is.
I don't know what it is. I was hoping that while I was doing all that talking, you were going to think about it. I wasn't even
thinking about it. My mind was just completely blank while you're thinking about that. I think we should do just tag a friend underneath.
Yeah. Simple as that.
So tag a friend underneath the post that will have the picture of the prize you can win. We won't exclude people, so if you do not have Facebook, all you do is just email us, and we'll enter you into the competition, and it'll also be on Instagram, and all you have to do is just comment underneath the post. So everyone is covered.
Done.
Do we have another competition?
We do. We have another competition, which we've been given a set of, a pair of tickets for the game fair, which is very soon, actually. Yeah. It is in... I'm going to check so I don't get this wrong. It is end of July. 28th to the 30th of July, it is the game fair at Hatfield House.
I won't be there.
I might be there.
Because I'm going to a festival.
Yes, you are.
A music festival.
But I think I'm going to be there. I'm undecided yet. If I can go, I will go. But we have a pair of tickets to give away. So if you want to win those, it's also going to be social media, and it's going to be related to the game fair. So go and check out our Facebook and Instagram feeds. Either of the Facebook pages we have, the Pace Brothers, or our podcast, and also Instagram, Pace_Brothers, and we'll do something which is related to the game fair.
So just keep an eye out for it, and
But it's a great prize. I think they're 45 quid each is what the value is. So if you're going, it's definitely worth entering because you might very well be in with a good chance of winning.
Mm-hmm. Anything else going on?
No, I think that's it.
I think we are going to do a show in 2 weeks or so, which is going to be a catch-up because we haven't done a catch-up of news and what's going on with us and loads of other stuff that's been happening over the last few weeks because we've been at shows ourselves and we've had some fantastic guests on that are better than us. So.
I'll just finish off by saying that we wouldn't be able to bring you this podcast and bring you fascinating guests from around the world if it wasn't from the support of our sponsors, the Scottish Association, if I can spit my words out, for Countrysports, who have supported the podcast from day one. If you're not a member of a hunting, fishing, countryside organisation, you should be. Go and check them out, and you can go and check out their website. Just Google SACS or the Scottish Association for Countrysports. You'll find their website and all the details.
Brand new website.
Yes, and the other thing I was going to say, and also the companies who give us stuff to give away, Hornady, Caldwell, Bushnell. Go and check out their kit as well because they also support the podcast.
Yep, they do. I was going to say that if you want more reasons of why you should be joining an organisation, listen to the previous podcast.
Very good point.
It's very relevant of all of the stuff that goes on in the background of all of the organisations that people don't realise, and you should be joining. In fact, insurance should be the last reason why you're joining.
Yes. But
also you should be having insurance at the same time.
Yes, you should. But that was all covered in the show we did 2 weeks ago, which was live recorded at the Northern Shooting Show. And the show that we are bringing you 2 weeks' time
will be the second day.
Yes, will be the second day. A whole new variety of guests, whole new variety of topics. And it's going to be a good one.
Enjoy.
Louise, thank you very much for joining us on the Into the Wilderness podcast. We are going to find out, hopefully, a lot about you, and I have in my hand here your book, which I have consumed now. Before we get to, I suppose the book kind of touches on this a little bit, but before we really sort of get into this journey, tell us a little bit about yourself from early years so that we can kind of paint a picture of who you are and who you were before you started this.
Okay, well, I'm a writer, but I grew up, actually, I'm a farmer's daughter. I grew up in Essex, but my family are all from Scotland, so I've moved back to Scotland. And I've been a journalist for the last 10 years, and I was working for the Daily Telegraph for the last 5 years as their environment correspondent. And I was a bit burnt out, frankly, because I was writing about climate change, and I had a few editors who didn't believe it existed, so it was slightly like banging my head against a brick wall. But it was an amazing experience, and I remain very passionate about the subject. It's a great newspaper. So when I moved on, I wanted to write about climate change, but it's tricky to make that interesting. So I was living in the Highlands for a year, pretty much only eating venison and wild food, and reading lots of interesting books like Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer, which you might have read. And I started saying to people, I only eat animals I kill myself. And I didn't really mean it at first, but then it became apparent that it was an issue people were really worried about. People don't know where their food is from. And I also realised it's really about climate change, and a way to talk about climate change that people can understand, because you're giving them power, because the choices we make when we eat can affect the environment. So I realised it was a really accessible way to talk about climate change as well. So I decided to write a book about it.
But you spent quite a period of time not really eating any meat at all.
Yeah, no, not really, because well, during the book, I ate very little meat, actually, because I was only eating animals I killed myself. And it was only 18 months in that I'm giving it away, but I shot a red stag. So before that, the occasional rabbit isn't that much meat. So I was pretty much veggie that year. And before that, I was what I call a blind omnivore. So I ate meat, but I didn't really think about it. Mm-hmm. I wasn't a really passionate carnivore like some people are, but I would sort of just have chicken or fish and not really think about it, which is where I think a lot of people are. And I was concerned about it, but I didn't want to be that person who starts, when you go to a dinner party, start asking the hostess, where's it from, and be sort of rude and inconsiderate. So it took something quite extreme to change my behaviour. But I'm hoping that my book means that people don't have to do something so extreme, but they can have an understanding of where their meat comes from so that they can eat it in a better way.
I think that quite often people, they actually don't really want to know, because I think if they did know, and we'll get into this, once we get through the interview a bit, but if they really knew where their meat was coming from, I think that they know sort of deep down that they probably wouldn't want to eat it.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because lots of people said, have you been targeted by vegan activists? And I've had one or two, but mostly I've had really interesting chats with vegan animal rights activists. And on the other end of the spectrum, the attacks have been from people who love eating meat and want me to shut up because they don't want to know. So there's kind of
interesting
people who don't want to know on either end.
Well, I think that's a little bit silly, not wanting to know what the true source and impact of your meat is.
No, that's definitely the case. And all the way through the book, I tried to get supermarkets to, it's possibly, I wasn't that surprised, but when I went to big retailers and said, I want to find out where your chicken's from, will you take me? They said, no, Louise, our customers don't want to know.
That's because Rochdale Farm is actually not in England, that's why.
Yeah. It's a pretend farm.
Yeah, it's a pretend farm.
Yeah, there was that. And then they argued that the customers didn't want to know, but I think they don't want the customers.
Yeah, they don't want the customers to know.
Yeah, probably more of that and a little bit of the customers don't want to know. You made me chuckle to myself there where you were saying I didn't want to be that person who asks the hostess where their meat comes from or their fish comes from.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. If it's people that I know that I'm eating at their house, I would ask them that question. But if I'm eating out, I invariably ask that question, especially if it's things like, even if I know that I'm not going to eat it, I kind of do it as a bit of a test with farmed salmon, because I want to know if the restaurant knows which farm their salmon came from. And I know this is touched on in your book, and we'll elaborate on it a little bit. But
yeah, but you're so right about it. And I'm what I call a British vegetarian, I'm not vegetarian. I do eat meat, but I'm always too embarrassed to ask. But I'm getting better at it, and salmon's a really good example. Another one's free-range eggs. Like, even at really posh restaurants, you get this sort of panicked look in the waiter's eyes, and you're being annoying. And often my boyfriend or whoever I'm eating with will be a bit annoyed with me. But I'm starting to try and do it more, because I really feel like one thing I'm really passionate about is the consumer having power. And it's a small thing, but if you don't ask questions, then you're not forcing people to change. And the farm salmon's a really important one. I'm going to start doing that.
Yeah, no, the point you make there is actually incredibly valid, because if everybody did that and everyone made a point of being dissatisfied with an answer, they would change. Everybody would change. The supermarkets would change, the restaurants would change, and they would source their meat in a way that the consumers were happy to consume. And the farm salmon is a good example of that. If everybody asks those questions or stops buying farm salmon from places where they know that it's having a negative impact on wild fish stocks, then things will change, because the companies need to make money.
Yeah. I think that restaurants and that have a very good way of tracking where their meat or fish comes from. It's actually a bigger selling point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you ever eaten at Tom Kitchen's?
No, I haven't.
You live in Edinburgh and you haven't eaten at Tom Kitchen's?
No.
I got my girlfriend and I got a meal there as a Christmas present from her parents a couple of years ago, and we went there. And that was one of the things I loved about that place, was that you sit down and on your menu there was like a map of Britain. And then all the produce that was on that menu, it showed you where it had come from. And it even named like the estate where the venison had come from. I really loved that aspect of it.
It's an interesting thing I found during my research is when you go to these beautiful posh restaurants like Fred Burke Miller's in Edinburgh, Liscargo, Tom Kitchen, they'll tell you everything, where everything's come from. And then if you ask an audience, they'll say they only eat free-range chicken and they only eat free-range eggs, but half the eggs we eat aren't free-range and most of the chicken we eat isn't. So you're thinking, where is this served? And interestingly, a lot of it is restaurants. And people said to me, it doesn't really, restaurants increasingly at the high end are provenance is part of their sales.
Yeah.
So but towards out of that, it's about money and costs, and they're the ones getting some. You can cook a chicken beautifully. It doesn't. I say it tastes better, but Nigella Lawson admits that her mum used to always buy the cheapest chicken, and it tasted amazing. So I think a lot of them do cut costs in that area. Well, it's a difficult business.
If Nigella Lawson says that's true, then I believe her.
But you also have to, another thing of kind of going back to the big retailers where they do advertise free-range chickens, and I used to work on chicken farms and stuff like that, and the free-range chickens, they're not really free-range. It's kind of like a bit of a con, they're allowed outside and they see the grass,
but they don't. Most of them don't want to go outside.
Yeah, but they're not really free-range. It's just one of these. Obviously, there will be farms that are doing it properly, but there's a large amount out there that are selling free-range products that really, you could argue, aren't free-range.
They're fulfilling the legislation that requires them, but it doesn't mean that they've got grass under their feet.
Yeah.
So, getting into this sort of experience and that's captured in your book, the first time that you actually took life yourself, tell me about that. Because a lot of people struggle with that if they've never been if it's not been part of their life and they don't have any friends who do it, the idea of taking a life to eat, even though they may consume meat, is sometimes a difficult concept.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult concept, whoever you are, even if you are brought up around people who shoot, which I was, and quite familiar with it, actually. But I came into it as an adult, and I came into it as a writer. So I was thinking about it a lot. But I actually think most individuals, if you think back to your first kill, it has a big impact on you, and it'd be rather worrying if it didn't. Mm-hmm. I think everyone always asks me, what's the worst moment? I think that's the worst moment because you have to take responsibility for that. There's no turning back. There's no one to blame. And it is a life. So, and I get, in the book, I accept that humans eat meat. And I guess what I'm exploring is whatever we eat, there's an element of death and suffering, and how do we minimize that? How do we ensure that our choices on a wider scale don't harm the environment? But yeah, there is that cold hard fact that you take an animal's life and you have to process that. And I think it's very interesting. While I was writing the book, the number of people, a lot of them older men, who sort of took me aside and gave me this sort of emotional speech about something that they'd killed, sometimes accidentally or when they were a child, and they wanted to get it off their chest. So I think it's something that most people have to go through when they do this, and it never really dies. I don't think that sense of responsibility, you always have it.
No, I mean, I would say actually that sort of every year or almost every day that I get older, and the more hunting that I do, hunting and fishing, the more I contemplate the loss.
Yeah, and that
definitely that's got more as I've got older.
Yeah, and that is something that a lot of people said to me. A lot of men who I know who shot all their lives. And what's interesting is no one ever admitted to a bloodlust. I'd be rather worried if they did, and I certainly wouldn't go shooting with them. But they did say, I now find it more difficult, and suggested when they were younger men, there was more of an element of bravado, and they found the killing easier. To explore that is another book, probably about psychology. But it was just interesting that what your experience, I can tell you for a fact, is going to get worse.
Yeah.
From all the people I've interviewed.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right though, and I'm not sure quite why it is. Why does it feel easier when you're younger? And I know exactly what you mean, and I think that is most definitely true. And I think probably it is just if you think of any aspect of your life when you're that kind of age,
Yeah.
if you're in your late teens or
Yeah.
early teens and you're hunting and shooting a lot, then even other aspects of life, you're probably not really thinking about the true consequences as much as you do by the time you reach your mid-20s. That's just life.
Yeah,
It's not doesn't mean that you don't care as much. It's just that you don't realize you cared as much. I think is probably.
It's just, I suppose, the 7 stages of man, and you're becoming more wise. One would hope.
Talk me through that first experience as well, because it was a rabbit that you first shot, and I think it's quite an interesting story that if you can just tell a little bit without giving away too much of what's in your.
Well, I went along to shoot rabbit with a gamekeeper I didn't know, because I always wanted to do it with to show that anyone can do this if you go and learn the skills. And I'd done quite a lot of practice with a rifle, so I was, competent and safe. And but when I shot my first rabbit, it was shot, but it disappeared. And the gamekeeper was like, it happens all the time, don't worry about it. And I felt awful, so I went back and crawled around the woods looking for this rabbit, and I found it. And that experience of thinking I'd got it wrong taught me a lot, because I think when I said the responsibility earlier, there's always a chance it can go wrong. You're doing something quite risky and quite difficult. So it gave me a greater sense of that responsibility. And I found it quite upsetting as well, because, I felt bad for any suffering I'd caused. And then everyone says, well, why would you continue doing it? But the people I was with weren't bad people, and they were harvesting their meat in the countryside, and I still found that a better way to get my meat than getting it from sources I didn't know. And it was difficult, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't give up on something. I felt like I wanted to learn those skills and learn from those people. So I continued, even though that first experience wasn't straightforward. But then it taught me something.
What of your friends at that point? I mean, I imagine you probably had quite a lot of friends who had never done it themselves, and maybe had mixed emotions and opinions about whether you should be doing it. What was your conversations like over coffee about what you were doing?
Interestingly, so my male friends who lived in the city were fascinated. They were quite hungry to know. Like, I think they clearly, and this is something your guys are tapping into very much, and something you must be familiar with, is they felt something was missing in their lives, or they felt a longing to go out and experience those things. So they were fascinated. They couldn't get enough of it. And my other friends, male and female, who didn't feel that, were still interested. And I was really surprised at the positive reception I got. I've met very few people who were against me doing it, especially those who ate meat were like, well, I think you should if you're going to eat meat. But then, and a lot of them said, oh, well, I couldn't do it myself. And then they sort of felt guilty, but I don't think you should have to do it yourself if you want to eat meat, but you should be willing to ask questions and understand. So I generally got a positive reception. I mean, there were a few people who just said, that's terrible and you shouldn't do that, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. It's something we bring up quite a lot, which is that we are never suggesting that everybody should go out and kill their own meat if they're a meat eater. But it does mean that you should still feel that you have a responsibility to the meat. Whether you feel like you can do it yourself is another question. That's no problem. You might require somebody else to do it for you. But then you have to think very hard if you criticize people who are prepared to go and take a life themselves to put meat on the table.
You see it all the time online. Of people that plainly eat meat, criticizing someone for hunting their own meat, and they have no idea what they're eating in the first place. So it's just taking the time to understand.
Yeah, and I accept that some people are too sensitive to do it, and also I think it's rather silly to say everyone should do it because it takes a huge. I mean, I did it for 2 years, only eating what I killed myself. I learnt an enormous amount, but I'm still learning. I mean, it really was only the beginning, and I didn't do that much because I couldn't, because all these things are really difficult skills and things you've got to take really seriously. So it's not something you can do easily, or I think as a one-off. So it wouldn't be practical for everyone to do it anyway.
If we turn that sort of wild meat experience, and we'll talk a little bit more about wild meat later, to the other side, which is the very much the commercial. I know that you took the time to go and visit a number of slaughterhouses. That is something that probably even fewer people than those people who have experienced hunting and taking life have actually seen inside. I mean, I've seen kind of around the periphery, but I've never done a walkthrough of a slaughterhouse.
I think I would find it quite hard, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I know from the videos I've seen, I think I'd find it quite hard. Can you, I mean, describe it in as much detail as you can on that? Because I think it's something that people should hear, if not see themselves.
Well, I think most people would find it quite hard, and they might be surprised that you guys would, since you go hunting and you are familiar with that world. But I think if you go through as a person to see what's happening, it's a really difficult experience because it's a place where lots of animals are killed. There's no way to make it palatable or nice. It's a pretty difficult place, and when I went in to write about it, I went in as a sort of super sensitive writer trying to explain and make sense of everything, and it really shut me down for months afterwards. I was pretty traumatized by it. But having said that, I think you guys would be okay if you went in as part of an agricultural student group. If you put that kind of head on and understand that you're trying to understand how your meat is processed as part of a job. And it was a little bit similar to the rabbit, like, why did I do it again? Well, because the farmers I was talking to, who I admired so much, who were raising meat in sustainable ways and I think managing our countryside in a good way, that's part of their business. So if you're going to judge whether they should be able to continue or not, you have to look at that as part of their business. And I always felt the book as a whole, I was going to look at that, because I just felt as a journalist, you can't write about wild meat. I mean, it's all very well for you guys, but most people can't get their hands on that. So I wanted to give them the answers of where their ordinary meat came from. And the fact that no one had done it much sort of encouraged me more as a writer, because I just thought, well, this is an important subject that someone needs to look at.
And how did you're obviously seeing a lot of animals walking through the abattoir system while you're there. I mean, maybe just describe that a little bit, because I think that's the one thing is looking at animal reactions to the noises, and it's not a particularly pleasant environment inside there. It's kind of claustrophobic almost.
No, I mean, a lairage should be a really calm place. If it's not, then the farmers won't use that abattoir. A good farmer, which most farmers are, an abattoir should be a really calm place. And the ones I saw generally were, pigs should be able to fall asleep. That the lairage, that's a place before they go into the abattoir. So that should be a calm place. But then once you're in, the killing's very fast as possible, and then it's this massive industrial machine and very difficult to look at, because it's the visually and the smell and the sounds are all quite shocking to a sensitive modern human. I think in the past people saw that happening in the marketplace, and so they were used to seeing animals chopped up and stuff. So it's really a very visceral, shocking experience to see that. So that's another reason why I don't think everyone should do it, because most people just come out upset and shocked, because that's what it is. That's how your meat comes from. But it's a job as well. A lot of people are working there. Something that really concerns me are the rights of the workers. It's a really difficult job, and lots of people suffer from a lot of industrial issues around injury and stuff. So we have to think about, if you're going to eat meat, to pay more for it, so those people are paid well, and because that's how your meat's going to get produced. That's where it comes from. That's why I wrote it, because that's what people need to know.
I mean, I doubt anybody's going to suggest that we should try and pull back and remove that form of agriculture because, well, for one thing, it's completely unviable with the human population that we have. In fact,
people suggest that.
Yeah, a lot of people suggest it. Well, I mean, I think that's probably how realistic and maybe a grasp on the consequences of our actions as humans on the planet. But I think from the research that I've done, not related to this interview, but sadly it's quite often the case that actually the worse the animal welfare, the better it is for the environment as a whole. But how did you compare that experience, that sort of mass agricultural experience, to the wild experience that you'd had at that point, and then the experiences that you had later on, sourcing meat from wild sources as opposed to farmed agricultural sources, and knowing the process that they went through?
Well, I'll tell you what really made me want to eat free-range pig, and it wasn't seeing pigs with their tails docked in pens with nothing to root through. I mean, they looked bored, and I didn't like to see pigs that sort of in such close spaces. But when you see a pig rooting around outside, it's such a natural thing for a pig to be doing. It's really makes you want all pigs to have that experience. That was like more that convinced me more than seeing the factory farm, strangely. So, and also that's something that lots of people can see if they go out to Open Farm Sunday, or try and or even something like Gorgie City Farm. If you live in a city, that's a much more accessible way and a positive way to help people make their minds up, which I think is they're more likely to do. And also I question what you said about, if the animal welfare worse, then it's better for the environment. I mean, I think what you're referring to is like the UN have done big reports saying that factory farm chicken and pigs have much lower CO2.
Yeah, I was going to get onto sort of carbon footprint, but yeah, that's what I was referring to. Like chicken, for example, is a good example of that.
And I'm sure in some studies that's true, but you've got to think about lots of different factors. And welfare is one of them, and disease is another one, and I think there's a sense of conscience and philosophy for humans. How far can we push our relationship?
Absolutely, yeah.
But the answer comes down to less meat. Mm-hmm. I think if you're going to if I'm going to argue, you want your pig rooting around, you've got to pay more for your pig.
Yeah.
And I looked at it the other aspect of your question was, how does it compare to wild meat? I looked at them quite separately because I felt like I couldn't really compare them. I mean, I personally enjoy eating wild meat because it tastes better.
It does,
like,
yeah.
Rabbit is delicious. But I don't eat it that often. I mean, there's actually quite a lot out there, but it's never going to be something in our current environment that we're able to eat a lot of. So I think of it as two different food groups, really.
You also spent some time in a halal slaughterhouse.
No, I didn't go to a halal.
Did you not go to one?
No, I saw halal being slaughtered in Morocco.
Oh, okay, my mistake.
I saw it happen, and I interviewed the people, halal, the association that checks it and keeps it halal. Mm-hmm. Most lamb, incidentally, in this country is halal because we have to export so much to the Middle East. But most of it is done halal, so it's actually no different, except for a prayer, theologically there's lots of other differences which I try to explain in the book. But yeah, I felt like that was an important issue to look at because it's a growing sector of the meat market and the food that we're eating in Britain.
I mean, what was your take on that when compared to non-halal traditional slaughtering processes from an agricultural standpoint?
I interviewed a vet, and the vet is in the centre of that chapter. and the vet says non-stun is cruel.
Mm-hmm.
So the vet says pretty emphatically what the veterinary practice think. So I don't think I need to say what my opinion is, because a vet states what the facts are about non-stun. So non-stun is not knocking the animal out beforehand.
Yeah, they're bled while they're conscious.
That's about 20%. But I looked at it sympathetically, because I have eaten halal meat when I was staying with a family in Morocco, and they slaughtered a sheep on the roof, as everyone did, because it was the end of Eid, and then every part of the animal was eaten and shared amongst the family, and I was a guest of honor, and I was given that, and I took it with gratitude. So it's a little bit of that's a joy in writing a book. You can be complex, and halal is complex. And I guess I'm a great believer in the British value of freedom of religious freedom. So I think so having said that, the British Veterinary Association's view on non-stun is a fact. They think it's wrong, and I think in a factory environment, I would like to see it change, but I think that's got to come from the community themselves. And so that discussion is happening. I wrote that chapter for my Muslim friends who are concerned about where their meat comes from, so they want to know as well. And I think then they can make those decisions.
I think there's a large amount of people that consume halal meat, either they know or they don't know, but I've consumed a massive amount, because in the military nearly all the meat is halal. You have no choice.
Of course, yeah. A lot of big, I don't want to name names without double checking, but a lot of big fast food restaurants in the UK would serve halal meat, because it's easier, because then if customers come in, they know that's the case. But most of it is stun, so it's not any different. But the non-stun is a concern, but and there is a call for it to be banned or to be labelled. I think there should certainly be more information so that people can make those decisions. And I think, buying meat, people need to know how to, labelling would be good. But non-stun, stun labelling is not going to happen anytime soon. But if you're aware of organic or free range, there are lots of labels which would only be stun. I think red tractor as well. So you can still be aware of where it happens.
I think personally it's quite distasteful that there hasn't been more information about it out there, because there are a lot of people eating halal meat, and at this point you don't really know whether it's stun or non-stun. And I think a lot of people would be pretty annoyed if they actually knew that, but the information is simply not out there. And I think that if it didn't have the religious controversy with it, that it would have been, if it had been any other food issue, it would have been dealt with a long time ago. So I take the personal, quite strong exception to it not being really easy to know how my meat has been killed in that way, because you assume, and the vast majority of public in this country would assume, maybe not now because it's become a little bit more, it's been in newspapers and there's been articles about it, but would assume that nothing has changed. They wouldn't realize that the vast majority of the lamb in this country, although as you've clearly stated, most of it is stun, so there's not a great deal of difference. But I think people have the right to know, and I don't think we've been very good at pushing, or the food labeling has not been very well at pushing that.
Yeah, well, I've tried to give people all the facts in that chapter, but I don't think that you're going to be looking at labeling, non-stun labeling anytime soon. So I've tried to tell you the labels that you can look out for that show that it's done. So, and if you're being careful about your meat choices, then you can avoid it. But I do think the conversation has to be within the Muslim community and driven by that, because it's very difficult to impose beliefs on other people. But
you could turn that on its head, though, because there could equally be people who don't. I mean, just because if you I don't want to get into a massive religious debate, but
Yeah.
if people are non-Muslim believers, they equally have a belief. And they might not, and that part of that might be that why should they have to eat halal meat?
Well, I think the prime example is when I was in the military. I've got a Muslim friend as well, and when I was in the military, I did not know a single Muslim person. Obviously there is people, but not anyone that I ever knew, and yet we all ate halal meat. So why are we? And we have no choice. If I went to someone and said I'm not eating that meat, I would be given absolutely no choice. They went, well then starve then. But if it was probably the other way around, then there's a reason why they've given everyone halal meat.
Maybe they should have more vegetarian options.
They do have vegetarian options. They do. But saying that, it was disgusting. So, what choice do you have?
We don't have most of that problem most of the time because a lot of the stuff that we eat, we kill ourselves or our friends kill. So it's not on my mind a lot. But I think my point is that I think it should be discussed more than it is. Just the same as we should be concerned about where the actual meat comes from and the welfare of the animals that the meat comes from. We should also be concerned about how it's killing, and I believe that we have the right to know. And the fact that it hasn't been clearly labelled is, it's been highlighted, and you give the facts that are available in your book, which is great.
Well, I also wanted to make that chapter, I'm living through a time where there's a lot of conflict, and I wanted to make that chapter about trying to understand people, because I thought if I'm going to write something, it's going to be out there in the world. I wanted to contribute to understanding each other, not driving us further apart. And I feel you're right, but I think the discussion needs to bring in both sides more at the moment, because sometimes it's been led by quite angry articles in the media, which I'm not sure they're helping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there's as with most things, you need to find some sort of middle ground.
Yeah.
Moving on from meat to fish. Now, your sort of fishing experience, and the one thing that I wanted to sort of draw out from you is something that we've discussed a couple of times before, is the idea of fishing and obviously eating what you catch, but also catch and release. And you talk about catch and release and why you would want to do that. So maybe just tell us a little bit about your fishing experience and what it was like.
Mostly I did catch and release because I'm not very good at fishing and catching really small ones. Yeah. So, I'm not going to keep little brown trout. They want to get bigger. And I tried to get a salmon, but if I had, I probably would have had to release that as well, wouldn't I? Because, especially if it was a hen. I actually, the fishermen in Scotland, as far as I'm aware, are pretty good at catch and release of salmon. So that's not the issue of where the salmon are all going or what's happening to them. It's about the fish farms and climate change and overfishing. So, but I really enjoyed fishing as an experience because it brings you so close to nature, and it's been written about by lots of wonderful writers, that sense of communing with nature on the riverbank, because you have to understand what's happening to catch a fish. You have to think about life under the water and where the fish might be and what they're feeding on, and that's and you have to be quiet and still, and that's all a lovely experience. So I enjoyed fishing, and it was an aspect of sourcing your own meat that brought me closer to nature. But like I said, it's a little bit like the meat issue. You can occasionally get a wild fish from where there's a population or where the fish have been stocked. But most of us are getting our fish from the oceans, and the oceans are being overfished. So again, it's about knowing our facts and trying to make decisions about more sustainable fish stocks where there's enough for us to eat, which means looking at different species and looking for certain labels.
Yeah, no, what you say about being on the riverbank's completely true. I was actually 2 nights ago, I was fishing with my friend up on the upper reaches of one of the glens here, and the day after I couldn't join him because I had to go and work, and he's a man of leisure. So but he sent me a picture of a fly sitting on the handle of his reel, and in the background there was a massive hatch going on. And what I was excited about was not the fact that he'd caught a couple of fish that evening. It was the fact that what I was excited but also annoyed about was that I had missed this amazing hatch of insects, and that was the thing for me that I was most fascinated with, not actually what he had been catching.
Yeah, it's something I learned quite quickly. It's not about the fish; it's about the insects and what's happening. Yeah, so I very much enjoyed that, and I think it's quite a straightforward way for people to connect with the environment, which is a lovely, very positive, and fishermen generally look after the environment. A Fish Legal is a very successful environment organisation that goes around suing people for polluting rivers. And I think if they weren't around and supported by fishermen, then there'd be a lot more of it going on.
I mean, how do you reconcile what you said about catch and release, especially with regard to migratory fish and salmon in particular, is very true. We have a very high catch and release rate in Scotland. I mean, how do you reconcile that though? Because when you're hunting, you pull a trigger, you kill something, you eat it. Whereas a lot of people are fishing and they are catching and releasing. Now, if I just qualify that to start with, when you were saying that you're putting back a lot of small fish. Now, the target is never those small little trout. You're not actually fishing for those. Those are sort of a byproduct that you pick up by mistake almost. And so you carefully, unhook them, preferably with barbless hooks, and you put them back to grow another day, and maybe you'll be able to eat them in a few years' time. But a lot of it is catch and release. So how do you reconcile that sort of in your head?
Well, I mean, every fisherman says they don't go fishing to eat the fish; they go fishing to fish. So you're not. I don't think I'm expecting to get necessarily a huge amount of food from fishing in the rivers that I'm fishing in, and with the skills that I have, frankly. So yeah, I don't really mind catch and release. It's a nice. Still a nice afternoon on the riverbank.
Oh no, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely lovely.
If I want to eat loads, I'll go mackerel fishing in the season and I can get like a bucket of 20 in 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, you can get plenty of fish that way, that's for sure. Carbon footprints and food. Now, this is I've done a little bit of research into this because it was something that fascinated me because of probably the misunderstanding from meat eaters about how certain meat has much higher carbon footprints on it and impact on the environment. But equally, the non-meat eating public who probably also don't understand that some of what they eat in particular can have a really high impact on the environment. So what was the research that you did there and the sort of conclusions that you came to from that?
Well, it was a big factor in choosing to write the book in the first place because I was aware of statistics that show there's more emissions from livestock than there is from all the world's transport put together. And there's lots of questions around those statistics. So some people say, emissions from livestock are up to 50% of carbon emissions. And some people say it's as low as 10. It's whether there's so many different factors involved. Are you including water or deforestation and the types of animals you're looking at? But it's pretty incontrovertible that livestock do cause a lot of emissions. So that's one of the reasons I started writing the book, that if we want to do something about bringing our carbon emissions down and limiting climate change in the future, then we have to eat less meat. So it's one of the reasons I wrote the book. And if you look at it sort of bluntly, you could say cattle are the worst. But I think it definitely depends on where you are in the world. In the Scotland and Britain as a whole, there's a lot of areas where you can only really grow grass, and a great way to convert their grass to protein is to graze cattle on it. And then you're also maintaining pasture, often pasture that's never been ploughed up, which is a good carbon store. So there are arguments that you can, that some forms of beef are actually quite good for the environment. But there are so many studies, and you can get quite hung up on them. But it's really pretty simple: eat less meat, but in this country, you can buy meat from farmers who are pasture fed animals, which are maybe contributing to helping not only the landscape and wildlife, but perhaps a carbon store by giving a farmer incentive to keep up pasture. So it's a complicated picture, but I think that there is a place for meat in certain places in the world.
It's a good approach to have that, which isn't just the sort of blanket approach of, well, reductions everywhere, because, as you say, there are circumstances where it can be benefit. I would say, though, that just the statement of eat less meat probably isn't, I wouldn't believe would be true for the overall impact, because, and I know not everybody can do it, and we've been talking about that probably from when we started the interview until now, but I actually sort of concluded an article on this topic just recently, which was that I probably eat, and my brother probably eats, and our family probably eat much more meat than the vast majority of people in this country, certainly well above what the average is, because we can.
Yeah.
But our impact, because we are lucky enough to be able to source the vast majority of it from wild sources, quite possibly, although I haven't done the maths on it, but if you just think about the logic of habitat management and population management and overgrazing that could come from the activities that we're doing, would actually have a net positive impact. And in actual fact, by reducing our meat intake from wild sources, could have the opposite impact what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are definitely different courses, different horses to use it. But I've tried to say I think the reason why I've sort of promote this rather blunt message, eat less meat, is, I did start this book, like I said at the beginning of the conversation, with a view to doing something useful about climate change, because I've sat in an office interviewing scientists about what's going to happen for a long time, and I want to see something done about it. And I think globally it will definitely help. But there are definitely circumstances for different people, and I think people argue about the statistics, but really just look at your own life and make your own decisions. And there was a great moment when I was interviewing a lady called Caroline Wheatley Hubbard, and she raises these beautiful ginger pigs, Tamworth. And I was talking to her, and I was saying, people need to eat less meat, and there's this new UN study, but that shows about the health, and but it's fine. We can eat bacon, just not every day. And she said, well, I eat bacon every day. And of course she does, because she raises these Tamworth. She eats 3 times a day, and she's really healthy. And I don't think she's doing anything bad. You see what I mean? She's just living in her circumstances and her environment.
And that's the key. I think what you've just said there is the key. Yeah. It's a big question when you look at the industry, because I think arguably you could probably raise chicken in Brazil where you don't have to heat them, and it's cheaper, and it's possibly better for the environment because you're using less energy. But as we saw with the horse meat scandal, when you have long supply chains of meat, things go wrong. So then you bring in the other factors you care about and make the decisions about what you want to eat.
Well, we had this is months ago now, discussion about the increase of insects being used for protein, because of the energy consumption is great when you put it into insects. I mean,
it's something you touch on.
Good idea, certainly, even for animal feed.
Yeah. And insects taste quite good, because after we did that podcast, actually, we got sent a whole bunch of insects to eat.
Yeah, they are. I've eaten some, and I still I give them out at talks and stuff, and they're quite good bar snacks. And I think you'll see them a lot because there's all this protein stuff, all this paleo stuff. I think you guys can probably talk about paleo, but I think with most guys I know who live in the city, I just think really you're going to have a lot of money if you're going to eat that much steak. And I think
I would be broke if I had to
eat the amount of meat in the city.
I did, in the city.
So they want to pump iron or whatever. They want to be really muscly, so they have to get their protein from somewhere.
Insects. It's a good way.
So let them eat crickets.
Crickets aren't bad, actually. What was the one? Locusts aren't great.
No, locusts were not good.
No.
The leg gets stuck in your teeth, though.
Yeah.
It was mealworms. There was a whole variety of mealworms.
Yeah, I don't like the mealworms.
No. You need to put a little bit of seasoning on them. That's the key.
No, this is something too...
It's not something I put on my dinner every night, I have to say, but...
I think you're right, though. We said it before. We will start to see more of it. I think it'll become one of those little niche things. I think whoever makes it cool to eat insects that'll be where it starts.
I think it'll grow, but I don't think it'll ever be huge in this country. And I also think plant protein alternatives, like we're already seeing it, will grow, and that makes sense, because cheap protein is something valuable, something we need. And we can get it from animals, but actually it's quite a difficult way to get it from animals if you really think about it. We have a lot of science at our fingertips now, so I think that you'll see more plant proteins available as well.
Well, we had the first genetically grown burger not that long ago, didn't we?
In the lab, yeah.
Yeah. You mean the stem cells?
The stem cell, yeah.
Yeah. I don't really like that idea personally. In fact, you vegans said that they would eat in vitro meat, so meat grown from stem cells.
It's a kind of I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it, to be honest, but it's kind of a weird concept, the idea of just growing this what is, as far as science is concerned, meat. Yeah. You see, I don't like it. No. I don't have a rational reason for it. It's just it's trying to get your head around it.
I'd rather eat some tofu, frankly, and then save up and have steak every once a month or something.
You also looked into fast food a bit. Fast food, as far as food in the industry goes, is probably the thing that people pick on the most as being the worst example, but that is not really what you found.
No, well, I looked at McDonald's, and it was really interesting. I remember being they wouldn't let me record and stuff because they're very cautious of journalists because they've got into trouble before. But I managed to get a chat with them, and I remember, and they sat me down and were telling me all the beef is British or Irish. It does include old dairy cows. That's worth remembering, and it's the flank and forequarter. But they were saying, these are all free range. These are all British, which means they'll mostly be free range. We do sometimes bring, obviously in Scotland, they're in for the winter, and if barley's really cheap, some farmers will be doing that, but it's pretty rare. And I remember saying, but how are you keeping the price down? And it's just the scale. When you're making 3 million burgers a day, you can do that. So if you were in McDonald's, I'd be more worried about what's in in the bun.
Yeah. 3 million burgers a day. Wow. When
the horse meat, after the horse meat scandal, there was a big report, and McDonald's was held up as having a really tight supply chain. So I think that's because they've got a lot of money and they're slightly ahead of the curve of what needs to happen in meat supply. I mean, but I wouldn't. It's up to you if you want to eat McDonald's. I'm just telling you where it comes from.
Yeah.
But I was surprised by that. But I still think, and they've been targeted by people like Compassion in World Farming and the RSPCA, who will probably say that they're pretty good now because as charities, they've made quite a lot of progress with companies like that and where their meat comes from. So it's surprising. I think your parcel's come.
Yes, it has.
But I think that it's possibly the bigger companies. I don't know. I just don't want to give McDonald's too much.
No, I mean, no. I just
it's still a lot of it is dairy cows, and I didn't go into dairy. I didn't have enough room in my book for what happened with the dairy cows, but that's a concern.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably the whole dairy sector is probably a discussion in itself. But
barley beef does happen as well. It just depends on the price of barley. So then they would be kept indoors, and and it's still an animal. I mean, that's what's at the heart of my book, really, is how many it's an animal's got to die for you to eat that. So it's still a big it's still a beef burger from a cow. So
I just want to step back to fish farming, which we kind of just touched on as we were going through this.
Yeah, your video on it is excellent.
Say again, sorry.
Your video on it is excellent.
Oh, thank you very much. I've had a fascination in that aspect for a long time because I love to fish. I actually sit on the Esk Rivers and Fisheries Trust, so a lot of the work that we do is how can we make our river systems better to provide a better environment for the migratory fish to do what they do, which is survive and spawn and create lots of little fish to turn into smolts to head back to the sea. What happens in the sea is another discussion, because we don't truly know with regard to salmon what's happening to them when they're way out at sea feeding.
Isn't that amazing? All the things we know.
I know.
We're in a space, but we don't know what the salmon are up to.
It's crazy. But what was your reading and investigation, and where did you end up with farm salmon in particular? Because right now it's actually very topical. It's been talked about a lot in the last few months.
Sure. I mean, when I first looked into it, like a lot of people, when you start thinking about it, about tens of thousands of salmon in a cage, about the sea lice problem that's really bad in most cages and is dropping off onto wild salmon and sea trout, the pollution from the dung from all the salmon at the bottom of our lochs. You think this can't be right, it's bad for the environment, right? It's very hard to think when you look at the facts of salmon farming and what it's doing to wild populations to think it's okay. And then I went up to the Highlands and everyone said to me, but Louise, the jobs and the economy. And, as an environmental journalist, you're very used to that. Everyone says that, sure. But so I was quite suspicious of it and thought, well, doesn't sound like an excuse. But then you go to somewhere like Mallaig and where the salmon are processed. And it used to be a fishing port, and all the fishermen now are employed there. And there are islands where people are voting for salmon farms to come in. So I tried to look at it. So then I started looking at it a bit more closely, because I thought there is an argument for livelihoods and economics as far as I can see. I don't think I can deny that. I'm seeing that for myself, not just from the company. And I went to visit marine harvest farms, and what it is changing. It's too late in some places. The sea trout have gone and the salmon are suffering. And it's interesting when you look at Norway, where the government in Norway have been much more tough with the salmon farms and said you can't go in the mouth of rivers, and you can't stock that densely, and smolts can't be in freshwater lochs. And in Scotland, we didn't do that. We rolled over for a multi-million-pound business, well, multi-billion probably. And as a consequence, our environment has suffered. And I think if we're going to continue to have this industry in Scotland, then it's got to be much better regulated.
Yeah, I think you've kind of summed up where we need to go with that. I mean, there is definitely a place for salmon farming. There's no question about that. And I think that if done right, and there is a slight question about the chemicals that they use and
the antibiotics
antibiotics and what's actually in the meat. But I think that is something that can be dealt with, and I think it's something that would be dealt with a lot easier if it was in closed containment on land, which would then remove the vast majority of the problems. But it's just a case of we need to, as Scotland and the UK, be far more sympathetic to the impact that these fish farms have had on the natural environment, which is exactly, as you say, what Norway have done.
And it's the biggest food export from Britain. The biggest food export. That's huge. And the companies are Norwegian and Russian, very few Scottish companies. And our governments, as the Scottish government, in remote areas with all that jobs and money, they have rolled over rather. So they need to get it under control. But the big question, it comes down, it's a lot of it, again, do you want to pay more for your salmon? Because, frankly, probably marine harvest could make less money. Maybe they should make less money and we should have the salmon cheaper. But, I don't know. I suspect that might also be an issue, because something we haven't also talked about is the food for the salmon.
Yes,
so
of course.
Salmon are these migratory predatory fish, yet that's what we farm. Isn't that peculiar? Why don't we farm a fish that's vegetarian and doesn't migrate?
Because people like to eat salmon.
Like the Chinese do. So I think that's another issue, is that the food coming from places like Peru, where there's a lot of overfishing. And like at the end of my chapter on salmon, I talk about GM salmon. And I just think, you don't get to start creating giant geometric salmon until you can prove that you can fish them sustainably, that you can farm them sustainably, and there's recirculation plants and a lot of potential. So I would hope that would start happening. So perhaps the consumer can make a difference. And there's something called the Aquaculture Stewardship Council label, which is coming in, which will give, I think, consumers a bit more, a better option. Because at the moment, it's very hard, unless you're like you can understand where the different salmon farms are.
Yeah, exactly. If someone gives you the name of a salmon farm, even if they are able to tell you, which the vast majority are not, how are you going to make a judgment on whether that's impacting the environment or not? You're not.
Marine Harvest say all their farms are going to be ASC by 2020, but
that's not very far away.
No.
I mean, I think that the economic argument is, in terms of the consumerism, is a valid one, but I think it's becoming less of an issue as the technology improves. I know that the most recent information that I could get was that we're almost at the tipping point now where, if you're doing it for the long term, which most of these fish farm companies are, the economics is almost the same. Yes, there's a big capital output to get closed containment on land, but in the long term, with the reduction in the chemicals and feed and the recirculation of water, you're actually going to end up with, basically back to where you started in terms of the cost to produce a unit of salmon. So hopefully the technology is getting to a point where that becomes a non-argument now.
And not forgetting the escapees, because they still don't truly know what the genetic crossover is going to be with the escaped salmon.
Yeah. It's a tricky issue, and I think it was worth mentioning as well. Salmon is one of the top 5 fish we eat. There's a lot of other options out there.
I eat very, very little salmon, mainly due to that fact of I'm probably quite well educated in the topic, but yet if I went to a restaurant and, like Brian just said, and they told me where the farm was, I don't know every farm, so how can I make a choice?
Yeah, very difficult salmon.
Just eat mackerel.
The last salmon
you catch yourself.
The last salmon I ate was caught by a friend of mine from South Africa who had come over, and he was fishing on one of our local rivers, and he caught a couple of salmon, but he kept one really nice clean salmon. So that was the last bit of salmon I ate. Was just a few months ago. Just sort of getting towards wrapping up now. I want to go back to hunting. You started talking about rabbits. We've talked about fish. You did mention going stalking a stag, but we didn't get really any detail on that. Now, it shouldn't be different because a life is a life, but there is something different in the way that you feel, I think, between shooting rabbits and shooting a stag, just because of the majesty of that and the stature of it and the size of it draws something out of you, even though it's still taking a life. How was that experience for you?
It was really different. I mean, I don't know whether I could speak for other people because it was linked to my experience. So the rabbit was the beginning, and by the time I went after a stag, even though a stag is actually arguably easier, it's a bigger target, I'd done a bit more rifle shooting and I was much more confident in my own skills. And I wouldn't have gone after a stag even if I was. So I was feeling a lot more in control of myself and my emotions, and I'd thought about what I was doing. And I also went with my father, which was quite a difficult decision because I had to think, am I trying to impress? Is there something in this book where I'm trying to prove what a girl can do and impress my dad? But towards the end, I'd been through so much. It'd been my own personal development, and I didn't, it was nice to go with my dad, but it was about my experience, and there's that sort of element of growing up and realizing only you can take responsibility for it. And when I shot the stag, I wrote in the book, defiant, because there was this beautiful creature, and I felt gratitude for the meat I was going to eat, and I felt. I obviously understood that animal had lost its life, but I also felt like I have done this and I'm not going to feel sad or apologize for it because I'm part of this. I was sort of standing up to nature. I'm part of it, but I'm also a human. And I did it, and I explained that in the book, hopefully slightly more eloquently. But I remember writing it and thinking, oh, I better write here how sad I was. And I thought, well, I don't feel sad. I felt defiant. And also in that moment, when you shoot a stag, you still got to gralloch it and get it off the hill. So you can't sit down and get too weepy because you've got a job to do.
It's about participating.
Yeah, and it's quite businesslike. And you still got to really concentrate because you still got a gun to make safe and things. So it's and also I suppose the experience of being out in that landscape, the mountains. It's such an amazing day, and you're in it all day, in rain and shine, and you're crawling around, and there's that feeling of being it's quite heightened senses because you have to be quiet and you have to know what you're doing. So there's that feeling of that bringing you closer to nature as well.
I'm really pleased that you said that, because pleased that you said that from someone who didn't start doing that from you could crawl and you were already hunting, because we've my brother and I have had this discussion before, which is that when you hunt you see more, and it's very hard to explain that to somebody who's never hunted. They say, well, I walk the same hills as you and I see stuff. So no, but I'm sorry, but you're not quite seeing it the way that I'm seeing it, because you're there like as a visitor. You're spectating, if you will. Whereas, like you've just described it, you're participating and everything's heightened and you see more.
Yeah, there is a writer called Michael Pollan. I don't know whether you've read him, but he's written a book called The Omnivore's Dilemma, and there's a chapter where he goes and shoots a pig, and he describes it as the same feeling as being stoned. And he looks into it, and it's a great chapter. I recommend you to read it. And I definitely found that when I went out quite often and didn't get anything. That's part of hunting. It's important to say that. So I spent quite a lot of time like lying in ditches as the dawn came up and listening for the birds, and is that a warning sign, and what's that smell, and what's the wind doing, and trying to understand it. So it definitely gives you a greater sense of nature, and it makes you think about humans in general. You would have had to have that all the time in order to stay alive. But now, of course, my senses are about my iPhone and, using my human sense for different things. And again, what we said about everyone going and shooting animals themselves is unrealistic. You don't need to take a gun and do what we've done to get those feelings. I actually last stalking season, I took a camera and got all and that was different but similar, but another way to kind of feel like you're to get close to the animal and get a thrill from it, or even just stalking it for fun to look at it, or sometimes I just a bit dreamy about it, but sometimes you do have those days where you walk out and you hear and you feel it. So you don't need to be stalking, but it definitely does that to you at certain times, I think.
No, absolutely. So what's next for you? Are you working on anything that you can tell us about? Say again.
Well, I mean, the beginning of this conversation, we talked about like no one knows where the meat comes from. Well, not many people know about where the potatoes come from.
Okay.
I mean, it's the most, you're putting fungicide on it through the whole growing season every single week if the weather's wrong. And where are things imported from? And I mean, there's also a question of when we're talking about carbon footprints and ethics. If you're deciding to be vegetarian or vegan, there's ethical decisions in the soya that you import, or the labour that picks your salad, and the waste from food. So I'd like to look into all those sorts of things, because I'm an environmental journalist, but I've realised the way to get people's attention is to write about food, because that's how we engage with the environment generally. So I think fruit and veg, and then we'll see. And I'm continuing to learn about stalking and shooting, because like I said, I did it for 18 months, for 2 years, but I never did it as a one-off. It's something I thought I'd learn over a whole lifetime. And I know you must have friends and know people who wake up on August the 12th and that's all they want to do. And I actually find it quite difficult. And I don't enjoy all elements of it, but I do enjoy eating game occasionally, and I want to carry on exploring this because there are new issues that come in. Like I might not have I write a book, but I want to always be open to argument and talking to people about this issue. You know, I want to continue writing and talking about it and trying to work it out.
Well, I'm gonna look out with interest for your whatever it is that you put out with regard to vegetables.
We could do another podcast.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about it is it's about killing as well, because the first thing you do is kill all the other plants and animals want to eat the plants and animals that you want to eat.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a great point. We brought it up before. There is this misperception that if it's a vegetable, then it's okay, you got no blood on your hands. But there's a lot of people really have no idea the amount of impact that modern agriculture has had on the land and the animals which used to live there.
Yeah, and you can crawl into a hole and not eat.
Well, exactly, yeah.
Or you can ask questions, so that's what I want to do.
If you ever want to start a hot topic online, just say vegetables are bad for the environment.
Yeah. Well, that's what I intend to do.
Yeah, great. Louise, it's been fantastic speaking to you. We have mentioned it a couple of times, but for those people who want to hear more about what we've just been talking about for the last hour, your book is The Ethical Carnivore. I'm sure that you can find it on Amazon or wherever your bookstore is. Is
Amazon the best place? That's where we found it.
Well, I mean, I would say go to your independent bookshop.
Yeah.
We don't have an independent bookshop near us.
Yeah, fair enough. But the paperback's out in July, so the hardback's out now, and paperback out in July.
Well, if we do manage to cross paths when we're in the same room, I'm going to have to get you to sign my book.
Totally.
Thank you very much for coming on, and I look forward to speaking to you the next time because I think that will probably and possibly be an even more interesting discussion than this has been.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Well, that's it for another 2 weeks. Make sure that you check out the book, The Ethical Carnivore. It's definitely worth reading.
Yeah,
and Amazon's the best place to go and get it.
I think that's where we got it from. I'm sure that if you've got to the end of this, which I'm hoping most of you have, your mind will be spinning a little bit about your food choices and where you source your meat. And if you want to delve into that a little bit deeper, the book is the next place to go for that.
Yeah.
Of course, we mentioned it right at the start. We've got a competition running as we do every 2 weeks, and for the next 2 weeks, it is a chance to win a Hornady beer mug and the Hornady ballistic bands, which lets you mark your ballistic drop of your cartridge for your specific rifle, and you can either wear it on your person, hang it on a bag, or actually put it around the butt of your rifle. So that's what you have a chance to win, and it's going to be on our social media feeds. Check out Facebook, check out Instagram, but you can email us at
podcast@paceproductionsuk.com, but visit www.thepacebrothers.com. All the information you need is on the website. Also, we are now closing the chimpanzees on our website for the donations. If you want to donate, then just go straight to Ivan Carter's Raindrop Initiative.
Just Google Raindrop Initiative,
there,
you'll find it.
and in 2 weeks' time, we are going to announce our total, because we're tallying
we
up.
have well and truly broken the £660, and we will tell you the total amount and show you the donation being sent in 2 weeks' time.
Big thank you to Data Technologies in Aberdeen. They had a whip round the office, and they just donated today.
Yes, it did.
A really nice sum of money. So everybody's been donating. It's been absolutely awesome. So we're going to have some very happy chimpanzees.
I hope so.
I hope so.
And I think that's it. Don't forget that this podcast is brought to you by the Scottish Association for Countrysports. If you're going to be at Scone Palace in literally a couple of weekends' time, go and check out their stand because we're going to be on it.
Go and check it out. And also, we will be there on the Friday, Saturday, maybe the Sunday. So if you see us, come and say hello. I need to give a shout out to all the people commuting and doing all of the shows coming up and down, because we know that we've got a few listeners that have been listening to the shows while they've been going to game fairs and are travelling over the weekend. So keep driving safely.
Speak to you in 2 weeks.